Hi, this is Miss Lambert, and in this lecture, I'm going to talk to you about carbon compounds, or another word for those compounds, or organic compounds. And you have been introduced to organic compounds through the It's All About Carbon video series. And we've also kind of discussed in class that the difference between an organic compound and an inorganic compound are that organic compounds contain carbon bound to hydrogen and then some other elements like nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. So in this lecture, we're going to learn about those rearrangements of carbon with those other types of elements that form what we call the biological macromolecules. And so one of the unique features about carbon is that it can combine in so many different ways, form so many different types of shapes, which gives species all the different shapes that they come in. And so we're going to learn how to look at a chemical structure like this one here in the box. And by looking at which chemical symbols we see there, like in this one, I'm only seeing C's for carbon and H's for hydrogen. And so by looking at their chemical structures, you're going to be able to pick out whether you're looking at a carbohydrate, a lipid, a protein, or a nucleic acid. And so I'll teach you how to do that, how to distinguish between those four groups of organic molecules as we go through this lecture today. So, as we've been learning, there are some unique features about the carbon atom. It can form four different bonds with other atoms, and those bonds that it forms are pretty strong and stable bonds, and we use them to store energy, and then when those bonds are broken, it releases energy. Carbon can form bonds with a variety of other elements, and it biologically anyway tends to form bonds with oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus. When it does so, it can take on a different number of shapes, including rings or chain structures or other three-dimensional shapes. So the four classes of organic molecules all fit into this class of molecules that we call the macromolecules. And macro means large, micro means small, so this is just the opposite of that. Macromolecules are large or giant molecules. And there's also a couple of other vocab terms that you need to become familiar with. A macromolecule is a polymer, and poly means many. Mer just means unit, so macromolecules are polymers of many small units. Most of the time they're repeating units, so it's more than one of the same type of thing that are all chained together or bonded together to form these larger molecules. And this kind of relates back to our first unit when we were talking about the hierarchy of structures. The cell is the first unit that we consider to be alive. Cells are made of organelles, which are made of macromolecules, so that's the level that we're discussing. Macromolecules are made by joining more than one molecule together. So as we've been talking about, there are four main groups of these organic compounds or macromolecules, and they are the carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. In this first lecture, I'm going to just discuss the carbohydrates, and then there will be a different video for you to watch about the lipids, the proteins, and the nucleic acids. So carbohydrates. Here on the left of the screen, we have two different examples of carbohydrates. And if I had nothing else on the screen, I would be able to tell you that that's what we were looking at. My first clue would be, what letters am I seeing? So in this box, I'm only seeing C's, H's, and O's, and those stand for carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So I know at this point that will narrow it down to two types of macromolecules. If I'm only seeing C's, H's, and O's, it's either going to be a carbohydrate or a lipid. So the next step that I need to do to narrow it down between those two is to count. because one special thing about a carbohydrate is the ratio of carbon to hydrogen and oxygen will always be 1 to 2 to 1. And so if I count here, starting with my carbons, I've got 1 here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have 6 carbon. I'm going to count hydrogen next. This little 2 tells me I've got 2 hydrogens there. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So there's 6 carbon, 12 hydrogen. And the last one I'm going to count is going to be oxygen. Starting up here at top, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have 6 carbon to 12 hydrogen to 6 oxygen. If you count this one down here, you will come up with the same chemical formula, C6H12O6. And if you simplify those numbers, you get a ratio of 1 to 2 to 1, 6 to 12 to 6. So because of that proportion of those atoms, I know that I'm dealing with a carbohydrate. Examples of carbohydrate that you're familiar with are all of the sugars, all of the starches. Both of those are in your diet. All of those are carbohydrates. And then celluloses, you eat them. They are found in plants, but it's not something that we can readily digest. It's going to be tough, and it's probably going to be something you're not going to want to consume. Their function, they are the energy foods. They give us quick energy because it's easy for our cells to break those carbohydrate bonds and release energy. Other than being our main source of energy, they're also used for structural support, especially in plants, which don't have a skeletal system. They rely on the more fibrous carbohydrates or the more rigid ones for their structure to keep them standing up straight or upright, because they don't have bones to do that function for them. Now, going back to our discussion about monomers versus polymers, carbohydrates are polymers. The monomers that they are built from are glucose molecules or simple sugars like glucose molecules. So one simple sugar is the monomer. You put them together, have more than one simple sugar joined together, and you build carbohydrate polymers. And we can classify the different carbs or the different sugars based on how many of those simple sugars are joined together. So here on the left, the first classification are the monosaccharides. Mono means one, saccharide means sugar. So as you can see in this picture, there's only one unit here, and I know that because the unit looks like a hexagon, just like the example that we counted a few minutes ago. And so one hexagon, I'm dealing with one monomer, and it's a carbohydrate monomer, so I must be looking at a monosaccharide. Here in the middle, now I've got 2 hexagons joined together. So when you only see 2, then this means that you are looking at a disaccharide. Di means 2. So 2 sugars joined together, and they're different types of disaccharides, but they all fall under this classification if there are only 2 simple sugars joined together. Now, from there, the next class are the polysaccharides, and so anything with more than 2 and sometimes up to thousands of these simple sugars joined together in a chain. You can see a long chain of these hexagons here. So 2 or more we classify as being a polysaccharide. Now looking specifically at some of the common polysaccharides, so I'm seeing that word here, it means there's more than 2 simple sugars joined together. We have starches, glycogen, and cellulose. Starch is found only in plants, and glycogen is found only in animals. And then cellulose is mainly found in the cell wall of plants. Starch and glycogen have similar functions. Starch is the polysaccharide that plants use to store up excess glucose. So if conditions are right, like they have plenty of sunlight, plenty of water, then the plant is going to make more glucose from photosynthesis than it actually uses to maintain homeostasis and grow and develop and live. So in that situation where it's making more glucose than it's using, it will chain all of those glucose molecules together and form starch and put that away for long-term storage of energy. In animals like us, we don't build starches. Instead, we take excess glucose, link it together in our liver, and make glycogen. So same situation. If you're consuming more carbs than you are using, then your body will chain up all those glucose molecules and store it for long-term storage. And you can actually overwhelm your liver by eating too many carbs, and it's not good for you to eat a diet that's just heavy on anything really, but carbohydrates will cause your liver to have to work overtime basically. Cellulose is a stringy fibrous material that you find in the cell wall of plants. So celery has cellulose in it. That's the long strings in celery that you don't want to get caught in your teeth. That's cellulose. And the reason it's there is to give structure and support to the plant. Cellulose is also a major component found in wood and paper. So anything kind of tough, chewy, that's going to be composed of some amount of cellulose.